Stay away from that man. He is dangerous." My father's voice was sharp and urgent, his hand gripping my shoulder hard enough to leave bruises as he pulled me away from the fence that separated our backyard from the neighbor's property. I was 7 years old, and I had been watching a butterfly drift between our gardens when I noticed the man next door sitting on his back porch, watching me with an expression I could not read. He was not doing anything threatening. He was just sitting there, a coffee cup in his hand, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that seemed strange but not frightening. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that looked sad rather than menacing. "Who is he?" I asked my father as he dragged me back toward our house. "Why is he dangerous?" "He is mentally ill," my father said, his voice tight with a fear that seemed disproportionate to anything I had witnessed. "He is obsessed with our family. He moved next door on purpose to watch us. You must never, ever speak to him. Do you understand? If he tries to talk to you, you run. You come straight to me or your mother. Promise me." I promised, because that is what 7-year-olds do when their fathers demand promises in that tone of voice. I did not understand what I was promising or why it mattered so much, but I could see that my father was genuinely afraid, and his fear became my own. That was the first time I remember being warned about the man next door. It would not be the last. For the next 25 years, until the day he died, my parents maintained a campaign of hostility against him that bordered on obsessive. They built an 8-foot privacy fence between our properties. They filed noise complaints and zoning violations. They sued him 3 separate times for various grievances, all of which were dismissed by judges who could find no merit in their claims. They called the police so often that the local officers knew our address by heart and stopped responding with any urgency. Through it all, the man next door never retaliated. He never filed countersuits or made complaints of his own. He never confronted my parents or demanded to know why they hated him so much. He just stayed in his house, maintained his property, lived his quiet life, and watched me, always watched me, from his windows, from his porch, from the careful distance that my parents' wall and their warnings had created between us. I did not understand it then. I did not understand why this seemingly harmless old man provoked such intense reactions from my parents, or why he seemed so interested in me specifically. I accepted my father's explanation because I had no reason to doubt it. The man was mentally ill, obsessed, dangerous in ways I was too young to comprehend. I was wrong about all of it. My parents had lied to me for 25 years, and I only learned the truth at his funeral. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, 40 years of them. My name is Quincy Ashford. I am 40 years old, and I work as an attorney at a mid-sized law firm in Richmond, Virginia. I specialize in estate law, which means I spend most of my days helping people plan for their deaths and helping their families pick up the pieces afterward. I have seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable, every variation of greed and resentment and betrayal that emerges when money and mortality intersect. I thought I understood families. I thought I had seen it all. I was wrong. I grew up in a comfortable suburb of Richmond, in a large house on a quiet street where nothing much ever happened except for the ongoing Cold War between my parents and the man next door. His name was Robert Harrison, though I did not learn that until much later. To my parents, he was simply that man or the neighbor or, when they were feeling particularly venomous, the stalker. My parents were successful people by any conventional measure. My father, Charles Ashford, was a senior executive at a financial services firm, the kind of man who wore expensive suits and played golf at the country club and expected the world to arrange itself according to his preferences. My mother, Diane, was a former beauty queen who had parlayed her looks into a career as a pharmaceutical sales representative before marrying my father and retiring into a life of charity committees and social climbing. They presented themselves to the world as the perfect couple with the perfect family living the perfect life. They went to church every Sunday, donated to all the right causes, hosted elaborate parties where everyone complimented their taste and their success. From the outside, we looked like an advertisement for the American dream. From the inside, things were more complicated. My parents' marriage was not happy. I realized that even as a child, though I lacked the vocabulary to describe what I was sensing. They did not fight openly, did not scream or throw things or engage in the dramatic confrontations that some unhappy couples indulge in. Their warfare was quieter, more subtle, pointed comments disguised as jokes, long silences that stretched across dinner tables. The way my father looked at my mother sometimes, with an expression that seemed closer to contempt than love. I was their only child, which meant I absorbed all of their attention, both positive and negative. My father had specific ideas about who I should become. Successful, ambitious, a credit to the Ashford name. He pushed me relentlessly toward achievement, monitoring my grades and activities with the intensity of a coach preparing an athlete for competition. My mother was softer but no less demanding in her own way, focused on social graces and appearances, making sure I knew which fork to use and how to make small talk at parties. Neither of them ever asked me what I wanted. Neither of them seemed particularly interested in who I actually was, as opposed to who they needed me to be. I was a project, a product, an extension of their ambitions rather than a person in my own right. The only time they seemed truly united was in their hatred of the neighbor. Robert Harrison had moved in next door when I was 5 years old. I have no memory of his arrival, but my parents talked about it often enough that I came to understand it as a significant event in our family history, a before and after moment that changed everything. According to my parents, Robert had bought the house specifically to be near us. He was obsessed with my mother, they said, had been stalking her for years before finally moving next door to continue his campaign of harassment. He was mentally unstable, potentially violent, a threat to our entire family that required constant vigilance to manage. The evidence for these claims was always vague when I asked about it. My father would mention incidents from before I was born, confrontations and encounters that had supposedly demonstrated Robert's dangerous nature. My mother would grow pale and change the subject, as if even thinking about the man next door was too painful to bear. I believed them because children believe their parents. I accepted their reality as my own, incorporated their fear and hatred into my understanding of the world. The man next door was dangerous. That was simply a fact of my existence, as unquestionable as gravity or the color of the sky. But even as a child, I noticed things that did not quite fit the narrative I had been given. Robert never approached me, despite what my parents claimed about his obsession. He stayed on his side of the fence, in his own yard, in his own house. When I walked to school, he did not follow me. When I played outside, he did not try to speak to me. He just watched, always from a distance, always with that expression I could not read. There were moments, though, when I caught glimpses of something that confused me. Once, when I was about 9 years old, I fell off my bicycle in front of his house and scraped my knee badly. Before I could even start crying, Robert was there, kneeling beside me on the sidewalk, his face creased with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, and his voice was gentle, worried, nothing like the voice of a dangerous stalker. "That looks like it hurts. Let me help you." He reached toward me, maybe to help me up or examine my knee, and then he froze. He looked past me, toward my house, and I saw fear flash across his face. Not the fear of being caught doing something wrong, but a deeper fear, the fear of losing something precious. "Never mind," he said, pulling his hands back. "You should go home. Your mother will take care of you." He stood up and walked back to his house without another word. When I turned around, I saw my mother standing on our front porch, watching with an expression that I could not interpret at the time but now recognize as terror. She rushed me inside, cleaned my knee with more force than necessary, and spent the next hour lecturing me about the importance of staying away from that man. She called my father at work, and that night there was another angry discussion about restraining orders and legal options and whether it was time to move. They did not move. They never moved. Despite all their talk about how dangerous Robert was, despite all their claims about his obsession and instability, they never actually left the house next door to his. At the time, I did not think to question this. Now I understand that my mother could not leave, could not put distance between Robert and me, because some part of her needed him to be there. Some part of her needed to know that he was still watching, still caring, still connected to the son she had denied him. And sometimes, when I caught his eye accidentally, he would smile. Not the smile of a predator or a stalker, but something sadder, more wistful. the smile of someone looking at something they had lost. I noticed other things too, as I grew older and more observant. The way my mother sometimes stood at the window and stared at Robert's house when she thought no one was watching. The way she flinched when his name came up in conversation. The way she seemed haunted by his presence in ways that went beyond simple fear. I noticed that my father's hatred of Robert seemed personal in a way that did not make sense if the man was merely a random stalker. My father did not just want Robert gone. He wanted him destroyed, humiliated, erased from existence. The lawsuits, the complaints, the constant harassment through legal and bureaucratic channels. It all seemed excessive for a neighbor dispute, no matter how serious. And I noticed that Robert, for all my parents' claims about his dangerous instability, never did anything to justify their accusations. He maintained his property, paid his taxes, lived quietly and peacefully. The police who responded to my parents' calls always left looking skeptical. The judges who heard their lawsuits always seemed confused about what exactly Robert had done wrong. Something did not add up. But I was a child, then a teenager, then a young man building my own life, and I had other things to worry about than the mystery of my parents' neighbor. I filed my observations away in the back of my mind and focused on becoming the successful, impressive person my parents demanded I be. I went to law school because my father suggested it and I did not have any better ideas. I discovered, to my surprise, that I was good at it, that I had a natural aptitude for the careful parsing of language and logic that legal work required. I graduated near the top of my class, took a job at a firm in Richmond, and began building a career that my parents could brag about at their parties. I also moved away from home as soon as I could, putting distance between myself and the oppressive weight of my parents' expectations. I visited for holidays and occasional weekends, fulfilling my filial obligations without subjecting myself to their constant presence. I built a life of my own with my own friends and interests and priorities. But even from a distance, I remained aware of Robert Harrison. My parents mentioned him often, updating me on their ongoing campaign to drive him out of the neighborhood. The fence had grown higher over the years. The lawsuits had continued, though they always failed. The police had stopped responding to anything but the most urgent calls, having concluded that my parents were the problem rather than Robert. He was still there, still watching, still waiting. I did not know for what. I found out on the day of his funeral. Robert Harrison died on a Tuesday in October, 3 weeks after his 78th birthday. I learned about it from my mother, who called me with the news in a voice that trembled with something more complex than simple relief. "That man is finally dead," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice, though I could not tell if they were tears of relief or something else entirely. Heart attack. They found him in his living room. He had been dead for 2 days before anyone noticed. 2 days. He had died alone, in the house next door to my parents, and no one had noticed for 2 days. Despite all their vigilance, all their watching, they had not even realized that their nemesis was lying dead on the other side of their 8-foot fence. "Are you okay?" I asked, because my mother's voice sounded strange, not like a woman who had just learned that her tormentor was finally gone. "I am fine," she said, but she did not sound fine. I need some time to process this. It has been so long. 25 years of that man next door, and now he is just gone." I thought about offering to come home, to be there with her while she processed whatever she was feeling. But something held me back. Something in her voice that I could not quite identify, some undertone of emotion that did not match the situation she was describing. "Let me know if you need anything," I said instead. "When is the funeral?" "Saturday. But you do not need to come. It is not like we knew him. It is not like anyone will expect us to pay our respects." That was certainly true. After 25 years of harassment, my parents attending Robert Harrison's funeral would be at best inappropriate, at worst a form of gloating. But something made me want to go anyway. Call it curiosity or legal instinct, or just the sense that there was more to this story than I had ever been told. "I might stop by anyway," I said. "Pay my respects. He was our neighbor for 25 years, after all. It seems like the right thing to do." My mother was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was strained. I do not think that is a good idea, Quincy. Just let it go. He is dead now. There is no reason to get involved. Her resistance only strengthened my resolve. My mother had never tried to stop me from doing anything so adamantly, not even when I made decisions she disagreed with. Her determination to keep me away from Robert Harrison's funeral felt significant in a way I could not articulate. I will see how I feel on Saturday, I said noncommittally. I have to go now, Mom. I have a meeting. I hung up before she could argue further. The funeral was held at a small church in a quiet part of Richmond, the kind of place where people went to say goodbye without a lot of fanfare or ceremony. I arrived early, parking down the block and walking toward the entrance with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The morning was gray and overcast, the kind of autumn day that feels like the world itself is mourning. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk as I walked, and I found myself thinking about all the autumns that had passed while Robert Harrison lived next door to me, watching the same leaves fall, watching me grow up season by season. I did not know what I expected to find. Answers, maybe, to questions I had been asking myself for decades. Or maybe just closure, the chance to see the end of a story that had haunted my family for as long as I could remember. The church was nearly empty when I arrived. A few elderly people sat scattered among the pews, presumably friends or distant relatives who had known Robert from his quiet life outside our neighborhood drama. There was no family in the front row, no crowd of mourners come to pay their respects. Robert Harrison had died alone, and it seemed he would be buried the same way. I signed the guest book at the entrance, noticing that there were fewer than 20 names above mine. 20 people to mark the passing of a man who had lived 78 years. It seemed impossibly sad, this sparse accounting of a human life. I slipped into a pew near the back and waited as more people trickled in. The service was simple and brief, conducted by a minister who clearly had not known the deceased well. He spoke in generic terms about Robert's life: a career as an accountant, a love of gardening, a quiet disposition that kept him from forming many close relationships. Nothing about stalking or obsession or the decades-long feud with the family next door. I listened to the eulogy and tried to reconcile the man being described with the monster my parents had created in my imagination. The Robert Harrison of the minister's words was gentle, generous, kind to neighbors and strangers alike. He had volunteered at a local food bank for 15 years. He had anonymously paid the college tuition of a neighbor's child who could not afford it. He had lived simply and given freely, asking nothing in return. This was not the dangerous stalker my parents had warned me about. This was someone else entirely. After the service, I followed the small procession to the cemetery, watching from a distance as Robert Harrison was lowered into the ground. I felt strange, standing there among strangers, mourning a man I had been taught my whole life to fear. I did not know why I had come or what I was looking for. I just knew that I was not ready to leave yet. The mourners dispersed slowly, returning to their cars and their lives, leaving me alone at the graveside with my confused thoughts. I was about to follow them when a voice spoke from behind me. "Mr. Ashford?" "Quincy Ashford." I turned to find a woman approaching me, middle-aged and professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase that marked her as some kind of businesswoman or, given the context, possibly a lawyer. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" "My name is Catherine Wells. I was Robert Harrison's attorney." She extended her hand, and I shook it automatically. "I was hoping I would find you here. Mr. Harrison left specific instructions that I was to contact you after his death." "Contact me? Why, I did not even know him. I mean, he was our neighbor, but we never spoke." Catherine smiled sadly. "That was by design, Mr. Ashford. There is a great deal about Robert Harrison that you do not know. He wanted me to explain everything, but he was very specific that it had to happen after he was gone. He said he did not want to cause any more pain than he already had." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a large manila envelope, thick with documents. "Mr. Harrison left his entire estate to you," she said, handing me the envelope. "The house, his savings, his investments, everything. It comes to approximately $3.2 million. I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. $3.2 million. from a man I had never spoken to, a man my parents had called dangerous and obsessed. "I do not understand," I said. "Why would he leave anything to me? We were strangers." Catherine's expression shifted into something more complicated, sadness mixed with reluctance. "You were not strangers, Mr. Ashford. Not really. Robert Harrison was your biological father." The world seemed to tilt around me. I heard Catherine's words, understood them intellectually, but I could not make them fit into any framework that made sense. "That is impossible," I heard myself say. "My father is Charles Ashford. He has been my father for 40 years. "Charles Ashford raised you," Catherine said gently. "He gave you his name and his home and, I assume, whatever love he was capable of giving. But he is not your biological father. Robert Harrison was, and he spent 25 years living next door to you, watching you grow up from a distance, because that was the only way your mother would allow him to be part of your life." She gestured toward a bench near the edge of the cemetery. "Perhaps we should sit down. This is going to take some time to explain." We sat, and Catherine began to tell me a story that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. 41 years ago, my mother had an affair. She was young, beautiful, recently married to a man she had chosen for his money and status rather than any genuine affection. Charles Ashford was successful and ambitious, exactly the kind of husband her parents had wanted for her. But he was also cold, controlling, and more interested in his career than in his new wife. Robert Harrison was everything Charles was not. He was gentle and kind, a quiet man who worked as an accountant and spent his evenings reading and gardening. He met my mother at a community event, and they began talking, and one thing led to another. The affair lasted almost a year. My mother fell in love with Robert in a way she had never loved Charles, and Robert fell in love with her with an intensity that would shape the rest of his life. They talked about running away together, starting fresh somewhere new, building a life based on genuine feeling rather than social expectation. But my mother got pregnant, and when she did, everything changed. She did not know at first whose child she was carrying. The timing made either man possible. She chose to believe it was Charles's, chose to end the affair and recommit to her marriage, chose the security and status of the life she already had over the uncertainty of starting over with Robert. Robert was devastated, but he accepted her decision. He loved her enough to let her go, to step back and allow her to build her life without him. He moved away, took a job in another city, tried to forget about the woman he had loved and lost. But then I was born, and my mother knew, the moment she looked at me, that I was not Charles's son. I had Robert's eyes, his nose, the particular shape of his jaw. As I grew, the resemblance only became more obvious to anyone who cared to look. My mother lived in terror that Charles would notice, that he would realize that the son he was raising was not his own flesh and blood. She tried to cut Robert out of her life entirely, but he would not go quietly. He had seen pictures of me, had recognized himself in my infant face, and he knew the truth that my mother was desperately trying to hide. He began writing to her, begging for the chance to know his son, promising that he would keep the secret if only she would let him be part of my life in some small way. My mother panicked. She told Charles about the affair, but she lied about the timeline, made it seem like a brief indiscretion that had ended long before my conception. She painted Robert as a stalker, an obsessive ex-lover who could not accept that their relationship was over. She convinced Charles that Robert was dangerous, that he needed to be kept away from the family at all costs. Charles, whose pride had been wounded by the revelation of his wife's infidelity, channeled all of his anger and humiliation into hatred of Robert. He became my mother's willing accomplice in the campaign to destroy the man who had cuckolded him, even though he did not know the full extent of the betrayal. When Robert moved back to Richmond, buying the house next door in a desperate attempt to be close to his son, my parents responded with the full force of their combined fury. The fence, the lawsuits, the police complaints, all of it was designed to drive Robert away, to punish him for daring to claim a connection to the child they were raising as their own. But Robert would not leave. He could not. I was his son, the only child he would ever have, and he was willing to endure any amount of harassment for the chance to watch me grow up, even from a distance. He made a deal with your mother, Catherine explained. He agreed to never approach you, never speak to you, never reveal the truth about your parentage. In exchange, she agreed to let him stay in the house next door, to let him watch you from afar. It was the only compromise they could reach, the only way Robert could be part of your life without destroying your family. But why? I asked, my voice hoarse with emotion. Why did he agree to that? Why did he not just tell me the truth? Because he loved you, Catherine said simply. He loved you enough to put your well-being above his own desires. He knew that revealing the truth would destroy your family, would upend your entire life, would force you to choose between the man who raised you and the man who fathered you. He could not do that to you. So he watched from a distance and loved you in silence and waited. Waited for what? For this moment. For after he was gone, when the truth could come out without hurting anyone except those who deserved to be hurt. She handed me the envelope again. Everything is in there. His will, leaving you his entire estate. Letters he wrote to you over the years but never sent. Photographs he took of you, from across the fence, through windows, whenever he could catch a glimpse. And a letter explaining everything, in his own words. I took the envelope with trembling hands. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with decades of secrets and lies. He also wanted me to give you this, Catherine said, reaching into her briefcase again. She withdrew a small box, velvet-covered, the kind that might hold jewelry. I opened it. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with an inscription on the inside. I held it up to the light to read the words. For my son, always watching, always loving. The tears came then, hot and unexpected, streaming down my face as I sat on that cemetery bench and mourned a father I had never known. A father who had lived next door for 25 years, who had watched me grow up from behind an 8-foot fence, who had endured decades of harassment and hatred from my parents without ever fighting back because he knew that fighting back would mean losing me entirely. I do not know how long I sat there crying. Catherine stayed with me, a quiet presence that did not intrude on my grief, but did not leave me alone with it either. When I finally composed myself enough to speak, she handed me a business card. Take your time processing all of this, she said. When you are ready, call me. There are legal matters to discuss, and I can answer any questions you might have about Robert and his life. Thank you, I managed to say. I do not know what to do with any of this. You do not have to know yet. Just take it one step at a time. And Quincy, she paused, making sure I was listening. Robert was proud of you. He followed your career, your achievements, everything you accomplished. He used to tell me that watching you become a lawyer was the greatest joy of his life, because it meant he had created something good, even if he could never claim credit for it. She left me alone with the envelope and the ring and a lifetime of lies to untangle. I did not confront my parents that day. I was not ready. I needed time to read Robert's letters, to understand his perspective, to process the magnitude of what I had learned before I faced the people who had kept the secret from me for 40 years. Robert's letters were extraordinary. He had written to me constantly, starting from the day I was born, documenting his thoughts and feelings as he watched me grow up from a distance. He wrote about my first steps, which he had witnessed through his living room window. He wrote about my first day of school, watching me walk down the sidewalk with my backpack looking too big for my small body. He wrote about my graduations, my achievements, my struggles, everything a father would notice about his son. He also wrote about his own life, his own struggles, the loneliness of loving someone he could never openly acknowledge. He wrote about the temptation to break his promise, to approach me just once, to tell me the truth and damn the consequences. He wrote about how he resisted that temptation year after year, because he believed that keeping his distance was the greatest gift he could give me. Your mother made her choice, he wrote in one letter, dated from when I was 12 years old. She chose the life she had built over the love we shared. I was angry about that for a long time, but anger fades, Quincy, and what remains is just the love. I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw your face, my face, looking back at me from across the fence. I will love you until the day I die, and probably after that too, if there is an after. And I hope, when you finally learn the truth, that you will understand why I made the choices I made. I hope you will forgive me for not being brave enough to fight for you. I hope you will know that staying away was the hardest thing I ever did, and I did it because I believed it was best for you. I read every letter, all 40 years of them, over the course of several sleepless nights. By the time I finished, I felt like I knew Robert Harrison better than I knew the man who had raised me. I understood his gentleness, his patience, his profound capacity for love. I understood why he had endured so much without complaint, why he had accepted a lifetime of watching from a distance rather than risk destroying my world. The letters were not just documentation of my life. They were a window into Robert's soul, his hopes and fears and dreams for the son he could never openly claim. He wrote about his work, about the satisfaction of helping clients organize their finances and plan for their futures. He wrote about his garden, the hours he spent cultivating flowers and vegetables, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing growth. He wrote about the loneliness too, the empty evenings when the house felt too quiet and the memories felt too heavy, the holidays he spent alone, knowing that just next door, I was celebrating with a family that had been built on lies. The birthdays he marked in private, buying a cake and singing to himself because he could not sing to me. I wonder sometimes if I made the right choice. He wrote on my 20th birthday. I wonder if I should have fought harder, demanded my rights, forced the truth into the open. But then I think about you, about the life you are building, about the person you are becoming, and I know that I could not have risked destroying that. Your happiness has always mattered more to me than my own. I hope someday you will understand that. He wrote about watching me struggle, too. The times when he could see from a distance that something was wrong, that I was hurting or confused or lost, and he could not reach out to help. Those letters were the hardest to read, filled with a helpless anguish that made my chest ache. I can see that you are struggling, he wrote when I was 17, during a period I now remember as one of the darkest of my adolescence. I do not know what is wrong, but I can see it in the way you carry yourself, in the slump of your shoulders when you walk to school. I wish I could talk to you. I wish I could tell you that whatever you are facing, you are not alone. But I cannot. All I can do is watch and pray and hope that you find your way through. And I understood, with a cold clarity that settled into my bones, that my parents had stolen him from me. They had taken my real father and turned him into a monster in my eyes, had built walls and filed lawsuits and called the police, all to keep me from knowing the truth about who I was. When I finally confronted them, I did it in the living room of the house where I had grown up, the same living room where I had been warned countless times to stay away from the dangerous man next door. I had prepared for this moment for days. I had read every letter Robert wrote, studied every photograph he took, absorbed every detail of the life he had lived in silent devotion to a son he could never claim. I knew the truth now, all of it, and I was ready to face the people who had kept it from me. My mother knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. She could see it in my face, in the way I carried myself, in the envelope I held in my hands. She started crying before I even sat down. "Quincy," she said, her voice trembling, "whatever he told you, whatever was in that envelope, you have to understand, I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked, keeping my voice deliberately calm. "From knowing that my father loved me? From having a relationship with the man who gave me life." My father, Charles, looked up sharply at that. "I am your father," he said. "I raised you. I paid for your education. I gave you everything. You gave me lies," I said. 40 years of lies. "And you," I turned to my mother, "you gave me a story about a dangerous stalker when the truth was that Robert Harrison was the gentlest, most loving man any of you ever knew. He spent 25 years watching me grow up from behind a fence because you told him that was the only way he could be part of my life. And he did it. He accepted those terms because he loved me more than he loved himself." My mother cried. She tried to explain, to justify, to make me understand the impossible position she had been in. She talked about her marriage, about her fear of Charles finding out the full truth, about how she had done what she thought was best for everyone. "I was 23 years old," she said through her tears. "I was trapped in a marriage I did not want, with a husband who cared more about his career than about me. Robert was kind. He listened to me. He made me feel like I mattered. I did not mean for it to happen, but it did. And then I was pregnant and I did not know what to do. So you chose the comfortable lie over the difficult truth, I said. You chose money and status over love. I chose stability for my child. For you. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing would have been honesty. The right thing would have been letting me know my real father. Instead, you turned him into a monster in my eyes. You made me afraid of the one person in this family who actually loved me unconditionally. My father, the man who had raised me, sat in stony silence throughout her explanation. When she finally finished, when her excuses had run out and her tears had dried, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. I knew, he said quietly. I always knew you were not mine. You look nothing like me. You never have. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had already detonated. Then why? I asked. Why did you raise me? Why did you let me believe I was your son? Because I wanted to win, he said. And there was no apology in his voice, no remorse. Robert Harrison took my wife from me. He made me a fool. Keeping you, raising you as my own, making sure he could never claim you, that was my victory. That was how I won. I stared at the man who had shaped my entire childhood, who had pushed me toward achievement and success, who had demanded my respect and obedience for 40 years. And I saw him clearly for the first time. Not a father, not even a victim. Just a small, petty man who had used me as a weapon in a war I never knew was being fought. You did not win, I said. You lost. You lost the chance to have a real relationship with me, based on honesty instead of lies. You lost 40 years that you could have spent being a real father instead of playing a role. And you lost any respect I might have had for you, because now I know exactly who you are. I stood up and walked toward the door. Quincy, wait. My mother called out. Please, we can work through this. We are still your family. I turned back to look at her. This woman who had lied to me every day of my life, who had painted my real father as a monster to protect her own secrets. Robert Harrison was my family, I said. He loved me enough to sacrifice everything for my well-being. He watched me grow up from behind an 8-foot fence because you would not let him do anything more. He died alone in a house 20 feet from where you sleep, and you did not even notice for 2 days. I paused at the door, one hand on the handle. He left me everything. The house, the money, all of it. But more than that, he left me the truth. And the truth is that you are not my family. You never were. I walked out and did not look back. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I have made significant changes in my life. I sold my own house and moved into Robert's, the house next door to my parents. At first, this was a practical decision. I had inherited the property and it seemed wasteful to let it sit empty. But I quickly realized that it was also a statement, a way of honoring Robert's memory by taking up the position he had occupied for 25 years. The first time I walked through the house as its owner, I broke down completely. Every room contained evidence of the life Robert had lived, the quiet devotion he had maintained for decades. The living room had a chair positioned by the window with a clear view of my parents' yard, the spot where he must have sat for countless hours watching me grow up. The walls were decorated with framed photographs, not of distant relatives or vacation spots, but of gardens and landscapes that seemed to capture moments of peace and beauty. In his bedroom, I found the photo albums, dozens of them organized by year, containing hundreds of photographs of me. Me as a baby, glimpsed through windows. Me as a toddler, playing in the yard. Me at 5, at 10, at 15, at 20. Every stage of my life documented from a distance, preserved with the care of someone who treasured each image beyond measure. Some of the photographs must have taken incredible patience to capture. Shots of me at school events that he must have attended from the back of the auditorium. Pictures of my graduation ceremonies, taken from far away with a telephoto lens. Images of me walking to my car, getting the mail, living the ordinary moments of an ordinary life while my real father watched and loved me in silence. My parents hate it, of course. They have tried everything to get me to leave, from pleading phone calls to legal threats to sending relatives to reason with me. I have ignored all of it. They do not control me anymore. They do not have any power over my life that I do not choose to give them. Living in Robert's house has allowed me to know him in ways that his letters only hinted at. I have found his gardening journals, documenting decades of careful cultivation. I have found his book collection, well-thumbed volumes of philosophy and poetry that reveal a thoughtful, introspective mind. I have found the photographs he took of me, hundreds of them, organized chronologically in albums that trace my growth from infancy to adulthood. He was watching me my whole life, loving me my whole life, and I never knew. The inheritance has given me financial independence that I never had before. I have used some of it to fund a scholarship in Robert's name, providing support for students pursuing accounting degrees, the field he worked in his whole life. I have donated to charities he supported, continuing the quiet philanthropy that characterized his later years. And I have started to build a life that honors his memory. I have become more intentional about my relationships, more honest about my feelings, more willing to show love openly rather than hiding it behind walls and fences. I am trying to be the kind of person Robert might have raised, if he had been given the chance. My parents still live next door. We do not speak. They watch me sometimes, from their windows, just as Robert used to watch me from his. I wonder if they understand the irony, if they recognize how completely our positions have reversed. I doubt they do. Self-awareness was never their strong suit. Sometimes I sit on Robert's back porch, the same porch where I first saw him watching me 40 years ago, and I think about everything that was stolen from us. The conversations we never had. The holidays we never shared. The simple, everyday moments of father-son connection that we were denied because of my mother's lies and my father's pride. I think about the things Robert missed. He never got to teach me to ride a bicycle, though he wrote in one letter about watching me wobble down the sidewalk on my first two-wheeler. He never got to help me with homework, though he apparently kept copies of the local newspaper that reported my academic achievements. He never got to give me advice about girls or college or career choices, though his letters are full of thoughts he wished he could share with me. He never got to be my father, not in any of the ways that count. He was just a man next door, a stranger behind a fence, a presence that I was taught to fear rather than love. And yet he loved me anyway. Through all of it, through 25 years of rejection and isolation and watching from a distance, he never stopped loving me. That kind of devotion is rare in this world. That kind of love is precious beyond measure. I wonder sometimes what our relationship might have been like if things had been different. If my mother had told the truth from the beginning. If Robert had been allowed to be my father openly, to hold me and teach me and watch me grow up from beside me rather than behind a fence. Would I have become a different person? Would I have been happier, more secure, more confident in my place in the world? I will never know. That future was stolen from us before I was even born. But I can honor the love that survived despite everything. I can carry Robert's memory with me, let his values shape my life, become the son he always believed I could be. I cannot get those years back. I cannot change what happened or undo the damage that was done. But I can honor Robert's memory by living the kind of life he would have wanted for me. I can be honest and loving and present in my relationships. I can refuse to let pride or fear prevent me from connecting with the people who matter. And I can forgive. Not my parents, not yet, maybe not ever. But Robert, for staying away. For keeping his promise. For loving me enough to let me go. He did what he thought was right. He made impossible choices in impossible circumstances. And he never stopped loving me, not for a single day, even when that love had to remain silent and unseen. That is the inheritance that matters most. Not the money or the house, but the knowledge that I was loved unconditionally by someone who never asked for anything in return. The knowledge that there was a man who would have done anything for me, who endured 25 years of harassment and loneliness just for the chance to watch me grow. I wear his ring now, the gold band with the inscription, "For my son, always watching, always loving." He is not watching anymore, but I carry his love with me everywhere I go. And that is enough. That has to be enough. I have started to build relationships with some of the people who knew Robert, the friends and colleagues who attended his funeral, the neighbors who remember him as the kind, quiet man he actually was. They tell me stories about him that fill in the gaps his letters left behind. Stories about his generosity, his humor, his way of noticing when someone needed help and offering it without being asked. He talked about you sometimes, one elderly neighbor told me. Not by name, just as the boy next door. He said you were going to do great things someday. He said he could tell just by watching you. Those stories are gifts, small pieces of the father I never knew, collected from people who saw him clearly when I was blind. The last letter Robert wrote to me was dated 2 weeks before his death. He knew the end was coming, had been diagnosed with heart disease months earlier, had chosen not to seek aggressive treatment because he said he was tired of fighting. I have lived a good life, he wrote. Not the life I wanted, not the life I dreamed of when I fell in love with your mother, but a good life nonetheless. I got to watch my son grow into a fine man. I got to see you graduate, succeed, build a career and a life. I got more than I ever expected, even if it was less than I deserved. The letter continued, when you read this, I will be gone. I hope you will not be angry at me for keeping my distance all these years. I hope you will understand that I did what I thought was best for you, even when it broke my heart. And I hope, someday, you will stand on my porch and feel my presence there. Feel how much I loved you. Feel that I am still watching over you even though I cannot be there in person. I read those words and I wept. I wept for the father I never knew, for the years we lost, for the love that was always there but always hidden. I wept for Robert Harrison, the man my parents called dangerous, who turned out to be the most loving person in my entire family. And then I stood on his porch in the house that is now my house, and I felt him there with me, watching, loving, present in the only way he knew how to be. I understand, I said out loud, to the empty air, to whatever remains of the people we love after they are gone. I forgive you, and I love you too, Dad. I love you too. The wind rustled through the garden he had planted, the garden I now maintain in his memory, and I could have sworn, just for a moment, that I heard him answer, thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to. It is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters, even if they tried to erase it.